It's now time for Energy Insights, where you get an inside view and local perspective of all the oil and gas progress going on in the Mid-Ohio Valley. This program is brought to you by the Southeastern Ohio Oil and Gas Association and can be heard every Saturday at 9 a.m. on WMOA AM 1490, FM 101.3, Jaws Country FM 100.9, and ESPN Radio AM 630 and FM 92.9. Here's Johnny Wharf, your local host.
Energy Insights on a Saturday morning brought to you by the Southeastern Ohio Oil and Gas Association, and we're pleased to be joined by Mike Marshall. And folks might know Ben Marshall here at the radio station. Mike is Ben's father, and we'd long heard about Mr. Marshall being in the oil fields most all of his life, and we're going to talk to Ben at some point, too, about growing up as the son of an oil man. But welcome to the show, Mike, and maybe for our listeners, just a little bit of background on you in terms of, you know, where you grew up and how you got into the workforce and go from there.
Well, I guess, as you said, I've been in it quite a while. I grew up here in Monroe County. Went to high school at Skyview, and actually when I got out of high school, I went to work in the coal mines, believe it or not. I was in the coal mines for 7 years, and when that all went through, I was lucky enough to get into the oil patch. Actually, my father-in-law had his own service rig, and that's kind of how we got started. And I got some experience with him, and we were just fortunate enough that I guess good Lord took care of me and give me a good job here in the oil field. But I spent about 28 years with the Oxford Oil Company. They were based out of Zanesville, but they had approximately around 1,500 wells in the state of Ohio, and I started out as a contract pumper for them, and worked that for about 10 years. In 1997, I went to a production supervisor for them, and from 97 till I believe it's 2012, is when the big Utica stuff started, and we got bought out by Eclipse. I went to work for them for 3 years, and so. But right now, I'm not working in the oil patch right now, but I've had a lot of time there.
So give me a demarcate again when you came out of the coal mines. What year was that? And then maybe a little bit of the separation between, you know, later when the Utica, like when you say when the Utica came around. Just talk about the difference in the industries as you remember them, since you were in part of it both times.
Well, I came out I started working in '84. That's when I got laid off at the coal mine, and I went to work just like I said, basically part time. And in '86, I believe that's when the bottom kind of dropped out of everything. It was pretty tough. Everybody was kind of scraping by to get through. Before then we had, there in the late 70s, we had the big $38 a barrel oil, and gas prices were good, and everybody was getting along pretty well. And then all of a sudden they went to like $15 a barrel, and gas prices went down, and so everybody had to kind of suck it in and see who was going to survive that. And then in '86, probably through probably 5 years there, it was pretty slim, but then things started picking back up. And the Oxford Oil Company, they were good people to work for. That was an individual owned the Oxford Oil. That was John Straker owned the Oxford Oil Company. They were at one time they were the largest independent oil producer they was largest independent on this east side of the Mississippi.
And that was out of Cambridge?
Out of Zanesville.
Oh, out of Zanesville.
Yeah. They actually started that company in 1942. Bill Straker started it, and then John Straker took it over. That was his son. And actually, when I started working for him, that's when John, it was about the time he took over as the president of the company. And like I said, you know, they were a little different than a lot of the companies you see today. They reused anything that they could. You know, they had people that I actually hired in the summertime that came in and would take old fittings and stuff apart and clean them up, and we'd reuse them. And you know, pipe where they would plug a well, they would reuse it, and they were pretty frugal. And of course, then once they got through that period of time, in '97, they started drilling some wells, and at that point, that's when I went to production supervisor for them. And there was quite a change then from the time then. I mean, we were busy all the time. We had a lot of work to do, and it was good work. It's hard work, but it was good work. And then when this Utica stuff hit, that really changed the complexion of the oil field. You know, I never seen so much money spent. You know, I don't know where all that money came from. But I mean, you know, we went from when we were drilling wells, probably the most that we would have in a well would be right around $100,000. These Utica wells, at one point, I remember sitting in on a meeting with Eclipse, and they said they would like to get their drilling costs down to $9 million for a well. So you see the difference. But then you got to look at it this way: we had 1,500 wells, and our gas production for the week or for the day, a lot of those Utica wells one well was doing more than those 1,500 wells were.
Right.
But still, when you start thinking about how much you're spending, you know, you have to have a pretty good return to get back with that. So
that's good stuff. And Mike Marshall is our guest, and in the oil fields for a long time, lives here in the area, and we'll love to expound upon this and just talk about some of the guys you met, maybe some folks you still hang with, and talk about the days of old in the oil fields. But we'll do that on another show. We thank you for your time, sir, and hope to have you back on Energy Insights. Thank you.
Well, you're welcome.
Johnny Wharf, and pleased to be joined by Mike Marshall. And I will say, talked to you on the last Energy Insights program. Very well-spoken man. Now I know where your son gets it from. Ben Marshall works here at the radio station. And Mike, maybe if we can just kind of expound on where we were. We talked about your background, being in the oil field really all your life here in the area for the most part, and maybe you could talk about something about maybe an oil field story you could share with us, or some of the guys you met maybe, and if you still keep in contact.
I'll have to watch because, you know, I might get myself in trouble here. Some of these stories that we have, but there's numerous stories that I still have. We have a Friday morning breakfast that I get together with some of the guys that I used to work with. Actually, the vice president of Oxford Oil, he's usually there every Friday.
Wow.
On there. So we kind of tell some stories on each other about. I'll just tell you what happened last month when we were there. There was a younger guy that actually still works. He still works. Most of us don't work anymore because we're either old enough or too lazy to get out there, I guess. But so he was telling us last week that safety is the big issue now in the oil field. They want to make sure they don't want any accidents or anything. But the company that he's working for now, that they put into effect that they GPS your truck, and they've got all these monitors and things in your truck, and they don't want anybody to have an accident. Well, what happened the other night, that one of their night shift people, he run his truck off the road. Well, they had a big meeting, said to everybody come into office, and he said, now, this is what we want you to do. If you guys are driving along and you're tired and you need a nap, said you just pull off and go ahead and take a nap. So we were all there and said, well, we were all way ahead of our time.
That's funny. That's good.
So the one guy said, yeah, he said, I remember one day, he said, I wasn't feeling very well, so I took some cold medicine. He said, I had to take a culvert down to this location. And he said, I went down there and I backed the truck up in there on the lease road. And he said, I thought, well, I'll just take a little nap. He said, I woke up and it was raining. It was 9 o'clock at night. And he said, I didn't realize, but my kids were looking for me. And he said, they finally got a hold of me. And I said, well, I'm on my way home.
That's funny.
But you see how that happens sometimes. But I guess we were kind of ahead of our time. If we got tired, we would we might take a little nap to rest up a little bit.
So and then as far as getting together with guys on Friday, and those are just relationships, I'd imagine if you're out there with those guys all that time and doing the, as you mentioned, in our last show, the really hard work but good work, honest work, right? So those are friendships that obviously have lasted a long time.
Oh yes, and we spent probably more time with them than with our own family most of the time. I mean, they were like family. The guys we worked with, and we all got along real well because you was always looking out for one another. And if something would happen that somebody didn't show up, or you'd go looking for them, or you'd check on them, and it was nice to have good people to work with. That's the big thing.
Yeah. What about the family owner? Was Oxford family owned?
Yes.
And working for a company like that, obviously, it makes a big difference.
Oh yeah, and like I said, Bill Straker was the one that started the company, and John was his son, which he run it, and it was family owned, and they treated you well, and when times got tough, we took cuts in pay and stuff to keep things going, but when things were good, they paid us, bonuses and stuff, and, it worked out really well.
Good story, and a good time again with Mike Marshall, our guest here on Energy Insights, brought to you by the Southeastern Ohio Oil and Gas Association. Mike, we thank you for your frank comments, your fun comments about back in the day, and thank you for your time here on the show.
Oh, you're very welcome.
Energy Insights on a Saturday morning, and again, Mike Marshall joins us. Mike is from the Mid-Ohio Valley and worked in the oil fields most all of his life here in the area, and I think for our listeners, I just want to, if we go back to the mid-'80s, when you got out of the coal mine and into the oil field, talk about a day in the life, just because most folks, will have never done it.
Well, we usually try to get an early start. The fact of it was you pretty much worked for yourself because, as I said, the company headquarters was in Zanesville, so they relied upon you to do your job, and you didn't have direct supervision. There wasn't people watching over you all the time. If you had problems, you could call them, and most of the time After I became production supervisor, I would call them in the morning and tell them, this is what I need to do. Can you send me people down? And they had dozers and track hose and backhoes and all that stuff. And if there was a project we needed to do, then if they had people available, they would send it down, and we would work on that project. And I guess the good thing, whenever I was contract pumper, you can ask Ben about this because it'll be something that he ought to remember, that when I was contracting, that was basically, I was an independent contractor. So I really wasn't working for them. I was working for myself. But in the summertime, they would have where we could paint oil tanks and pump jacks and things like that, and they gave us, paid us for doing that. And so I had the kids one summer. I said, you guys like to make some money and, buy some things for yourself? And sure. So we took my wife, Julie, and of course, Ben and Gabe and Abe and Jessica, and we loaded up the truck and put the paint in. We'd go out and paint, and then once they got everything painted, I'd send a bill in, and they got their money. And I don't remember what Ben bought that year, but I do remember one of them bought a TV. But other than that, I can't remember. But Maybe he bought a radio microphone so he could practice. But it was really good because it was all family oriented. We had a good time. There was a few times that when things got a little rough around, but it was enjoyable. Was able to get together that way. So
good.
Things like that doesn't happen today because everything is. Today is everything is contracted out to somebody else. There's no your pumpers today are called I don't even know what they call them anymore, but they're not pumpers. They're but they go out and they take care of these wells, but it's far different. I mean, it's just totally different than what we had when we were growing. When I grew up in the oil field.
That's interesting. So Mike Marshall is our guest, and again, our connection is he's the father of Ben Marshall that works at the radio stations here. And you kind of answered this, Mike, but maybe to the point of working in the oil field back in the day, and even not that long ago for you, but what it was like to be a family man. I didn't know if there was any overtime or if you had to get called out as a supervisor, as far as that family dynamic.
Yeah, I was on call 24 hours, and I'll give you one instance that happened to me. I can't remember what year it was, but it was Father's Day, and I get home from church, and there's messages on the phone. Oil spill over on the other side of Summerfield, and the oil's in the stream and it's going towards Seneca Lake, and we need you to get here as quick as you can. So that Father's Day, I spent it with all the guys that came to help stop the oil spill. And it's times like that. We might be at night, somebody's gas froze off, or somebody cut a line somewhere, and you'd have to go shut a well off. And usually, actually, during probably the last 10 years that I worked in the oil field, we had a compressor station that ran all the time, and it had to be looked at 7 days a week. So on Sunday, the guy that was the pumper for me, because I was supervisor, and he would check it one Sunday, and then I'd check it the next Sunday so that he could have a Sunday off, and I would have Sunday off. So it was a lot of, the family put up with a lot of time that I had not to be here. So
yeah, that's good.
So when you turn your furnace up and you get warm and turn your lights on, you figure up, think about those guys that are out there. They and especially now, like I said, that young guy that is a supervisor over these big well pads. He says, I sleep with my telephone under my pillow.
Yeah.
Because there's people that are calling, day and night wanting advice from him.
Yeah, that's good perspective, and certainly put as only you can do it, having been there and done it. That's Mike Marshall, our guest here on Energy Insights. Mike, again, great perspectives, and we appreciate you sharing with us.
Well, you're welcome.
All right, Energy Insights brought to you every Saturday here on the radio by the Southeastern Ohio Oil and Gas Association.
Energy Insights on a Saturday morning. Johnny Wharf along with the special guest, as we do each and every Saturday morning. This one extra special to me because he is the WMOA program director, and it is Ben Marshall, and we thought it might be unique for the listeners to talk to somebody who grew up with the father of a guy that worked out in the oil fields. And Ben, in our business, being in the field means being out doing a remote or something like that. Did you ever get out in the field as a boy with your father?
Oh, yes. There were definitely times. And, whenever you talked to my dad a few months ago, he referenced some of those times. And some of them I remember and some of them I don't.
Some of them he probably didn't want you to remember, right? No.
Mostly it had to do with painting oil wells in the summer. And I do have one specific memory of doing that whenever I was maybe 7 or 8 years old. But then there was one that he didn't mention where me and my brother Abe spent pretty much an entire summer, just me and him, painting oil tanks. And that was whenever I was about 16 or 17 years old. So that was a different experience because you're 7 and 8. You don't really have to help a whole lot. You can just run around and do whatever.
Right.
But 16, 17 years old, you got to pull your weight.
Well, talk a little bit about, I would go to the garage or the shed or something like that at your house. My dad wasn't a handy guy, but I would assume there are certain things that I learned from my dad that you didn't learn from your dad and vice versa. So based on the idea of him being in the industry of working in the oil fields, was there anything around the house that kind of lent itself to things that you know now? I know you do stuff around here that I couldn't do, so that's kind of why I asked the question.
Well, kind of, yeah, because, to be in the oil field as Dad was, he had to have a whole lot of different skills, and he has a whole lot of different skills anyways, as far as just being able to fix anything, being able to build anything, all those sorts of things. So, but yeah, there was always a screwdriver or a wrench laying around somewhere. He always has a crescent wrench in his pocket, just no matter what. So just stuff like that. And, unfortunately, I did not pick up any of that. I can't build much. I can't fix much. My oldest brother got all those genes, unfortunately. But, there's tools in the garage, there's tools out in the shed, there's tools on the farm, it's everywhere.
All right, so Ben Marshall is our guest. He is the WMOA program director and the son of Mike Marshall, who we spoke to on several occasions here on the Energy Insights program, and a guy that grew up working in the oil fields, and Ben as his son. So talk a little bit, I guess, about the dynamics of his job as you remember it. We all remember our fathers, when we were younger in different ways. Was it odd hours? Was it, obviously hardworking? You talked about that, but was it get home, take off the boots, hit the couch, or how did that work, or what do you remember about it?
Never hit the couch. No, never at all. In the odd hours, yeah, definitely. He was always up very early, and then he would get home, and he was an oil field worker. He was a farmer. He was a township trustee, very active in our church and all that sort of stuff. So, he was always doing something, but even working in the oil field specifically, he was, he mentioned this too, but he was always on call 24 hours a day, especially specifically during deer season. It was pretty much guaranteed that somebody somewhere was going to shoot a gas line. So when you got gas leaking out of a line like that, you got to be on it. You got to fix it right away. So he'd just pick up and go. That's the way it had to be. So that got to be a pretty common thing. It's just the way it was.
Final thought, and you can demarcate the time for me a little bit better, but I'm guessing that it was in the 70s when he was in the oil fields, maybe even before you were around. But I remember in my childhood just getting into the workforce, meaning I was in high school and doing things in the workforce, but I remember the oil and gas business just hopping at that time in the 70s that I can think about in my mind. So was it a busy time for him, or do you remember, was it tough times, or both?
Specifically remember whenever he was made the superintendent at Oxford Oil, was the name of the company at the time, and I can't really point to how old I was, maybe 12 or 13, but I specifically remember that was a pretty big moment for our family, because as far as I know, he had been a contract pumper for many years. And once he finally got the superintendent job, it was more full time. It was more more responsibility, and I assume all the things that would go with that. But that was more stable too, I would have to imagine. So that was a big moment for our family, for sure. So I specifically remember that moment. But I do know also, I think he would have ended the 70s probably in the coal mines,
okay,
and maybe in the early 80s in the coal mines as well.
Yeah, might have been several transitions from industry to industry as well. And as I expected, I think our listeners will agree, very interesting to bring you in here. I know that you didn't think of it and somebody suggested it, but it's nice to hear this side of it, and I'm sure our listeners appreciate it, and we appreciate the Southeastern Ohio Oil and Gas Association for making this show possible. When we get another chance, maybe we'll add on. Ben Marshall, our guest. Until next week, have a great day. Energy Insights on a Saturday morning. Johnny Wharf along with WMOA Program Director Ben Marshall, also the son of Mike Marshall, who we've had as a guest on our Energy Insight show. We've had Ben as well on a show, but an opportunity to talk about the family dynamic of the oil and gas industry, and we would extend maybe our conversation from before Ben, but talk a little bit about, well, let's just take it from there, the family dynamic of the oil and gas industry. So mom at home, mom working, brothers, sisters, how did that work?
Mom was at home, and I have my oldest brother is 6 years older than me. But as we've talked about in the past, I mean, there was definitely a push to get the rest of the family, working. As we talked about in the past, we would all go out and paint oil tanks whenever I was younger, and then me and my brother did it whenever I was a teenager as well. So there was a push to for everybody to kind of pull their weight, I guess, if you will. And it was always, Dad was always trying to teach us how to do everything, whether it be in the oil field or on the farm, regardless, he was always teaching.
Yeah, that's great to hear. So, again, Ben Marshall is our guest, and he grew up with a father in the oil and gas industry, and I'll kind of play off your thoughts. And most folks know, definitely that I don't ever have a question written down or any plans, or we haven't talked about any of this, but most people on the other side of the mic are like, oh my gosh, what's he going to ask? But I usually play off of what you mentioned. So as you and your brother were pulled out to paint tanks or whatever the case might be, was that impromptu? We need you right now. I think about the employment industry right now. You would take anybody to do anything at some point. Everybody's looking. Our recruitment, these ads, you can hear them on our radio station. But was that something that you had to go through a process to go to the head of the company to get or just say, Dad's like, boys, get out of bed, we're going to work?
Yeah, I think that was pretty much it. It might have been planned beforehand, and maybe Dad talked to the folks at Oxford Oil about it. Yeah. But as far as I know, it was just, you're going to paint tanks. And I mean, I don't think it was a question. I don't think it was an offer. You're going to paint tanks. And that's just kind of the way it was. And we, if memory serves, we spent the whole summer doing it.
Right. I think about, I worked for the county spraying roads back in the day. And I remember, I don't remember it fondly, but I'm glad I did it. So was it something that when you look back on it, probably life lessons, but you're in the radio industry now, right? Just behind a mic and kicking. No, you don't kick back ever, but
it did definitely teach me life lessons, and I think it is something that, especially as you get older, maybe you'll look back on fondly, specifically the time with Dad or my brother Abe, and, out there working or whatever, even though we don't get along sometimes, the family dynamic as that is, but I did also learn very early on working in the oil field that I didn't necessarily want to work in the oil field. Definitely my talents are better served elsewhere.
But, all right, so that'll take me to Mike Marshall, your father, and he spoke nothing but fondly about his experience. So, we're all set, in motion, hopefully to do what we want to do. And it seemed like he really enjoyed the process.
100%. Absolutely. He absolutely loved the oil field and, just working in the oil field. And just, I think he loved everything about it. I really do.
So Oxford Oil, do you remember specifically where they were out of?
They were based in Zanesville.
In Zanesville, okay. And then hired him probably as a young man from an independent company or just as an independent worker?
I think whenever he first started there, he was an independent contractor. And I don't really know how you get into that or how that really happened. But it was just a contractor status. And then he did that for quite some time. And then he eventually got promoted to the superintendent role, which he held for quite some time.
And then you mentioned something in the last show that we had, and I probably should have asked you then, but you said he was a pumper. And I don't know what that is. So do you know what that is?
A little bit. So he would just, basically a large part of his goal was to, a lot of the pumps or a lot of the tanks. It's not necessarily so much about the tanks as it is the jacks. So the jacks are what actually produce the oil. They pump the oil out of the ground and it goes into the tanks and stuff. And you have to get the tanks emptied and whatnot. But it's a pumper's job to go around to all the sites and make sure that the jacks are running properly. And a lot of nowadays are on schedule, I guess. But back in the day, you had to start them manually, and they would only be allowed to run for so long. And then you had to make sure the tanks were filled, and then all of them had charts that would roll, and they would be, sort of like a like a seismic thing that would
Sure.
sort of go along. So then you had to change the charts, and then you had to read the charts. You had to calculate the charts, which I never did understand.
Right.
But I mean, there was a lot to it. But that was, as I understand it, the basic role of a pumper.
Ben Marshall, our guest. Energy Insights is the program. If there's any oil and gas folks out there that want Ben to work, he says he doesn't know anything about it, so you can't steal him from me. He's the program director at WMOA Radio, joining us here in a little cameo performance for Energy Insights, brought to you each and every Saturday morning here on the radio, courtesy of Southeastern Ohio Oil and Gas Association. For Ben Marshall, this is Johnny Wharf. Have a great day.
Thank you for listening to Energy Insights, brought to you by the Southeastern Ohio Oil and Gas Association. Tune in every Saturday morning at 9 a.m. on WMOA Local Radio, Jaws Country, and ESPN Radio, as Johnny Wharf brings you your local and inside perspectives going on in the oil and gas industry right here in the Mid-Ohio Valley.